We're going to move on and start to talk a little bit about the state of the nation when it comes to funding. And we've invited Lexi Novitske and Paul Rutherford. Welcome to both of you. Lexi is a venture investor driving growth in the companies that form the foundation of Sub-Saharan Africa as a robust digital marketplace. And after becoming jaded of the New York hedge fund scene, Lexi moved to Lagos, Nigeria. Of course, you have to be where the action is. Africa's largest city, of course, and home to the continent's most active startup ecosystem. But so in search of a greater impact, she launched the private capital-backed Singularity Investments in 2014. She now supports entrepreneurs building Africa's growth companies, across, fintech, AI, logistic, health tech, et cetera, And she is now managing partners at Acuity Ventures, a venture capital firm that invests in early to growth stage technology companies in Africa. Paul, 20-year seasoned tech investor, founder, partner at Base Capital, headquartered in Cape Town, invests globally across all stages from seed to listed shares with a focus on marketplace and software business. Previously head of investments and M&A at Naspers in MENA. So, thanks both for coming and joining us today. Lexi, you're from America, and Paul, you're from England. Is the fact that both of you are not from here, is that almost symbolic of the African startup world up until now? And are immigrants the most prominent drivers behind the startup scene across Africa? What do you guys think?
And maybe I'll start. I don't think so. I mean, I think maybe 5 years ago, look, I started investing back in 2015. Maybe at that point back then, we had a little bit of an advantage because we'd lived and seen the growing tech wave that was happening in the rest of the world. And we were able to come over here and kind of easily pattern match on what we think could work in the local environment. But more than anything, it's certainly shifting the other direction. I think local Africans are coming out of major businesses with the skills and expertise. We have some of the top engineering talent. These founders have now, a very global lens, and they're able to also place that global lens on problems that they're experiencing on a daily basis. So if anything, I think you have to be local to really win in this environment, especially given the much higher competition today.
Yeah, so I would agree. Paul, what's your experience?
Yeah, I think it's nicely summarized. I think it was just, I think if you go back kind of 10 years ago and you looked at most of the companies that were starting, that kind of first wave of internet companies, there was a lot of immigrants, I think, involved with that. I mean, I think you're a good example of that in many ways. But I think to Lexi's point, I think it was just a function largely of the cycle. I think guys in developed markets perhaps had been through a cycle a little bit earlier. They could see that opportunity. And they were willing to kind of move across and tackle that. And I think what we're seeing now is quite the reverse. I think if you look at to be successful, I think we do need to be local. And I think if you look at most of the leading businesses emerging now, there's really strong talent, and there always has been. I think some of that talent was probably waiting to be enabled in many ways, and I think we're starting to see that now. So I think 10 years ago, yes. I think today and going forward, I think very much the reverse.
Yeah. So I remember meeting one of your colleagues at Naspers, back in the day, I think 10 years ago, and they were keen on doing something with us, and I asked them why. So they said, quite bluntly, as they sometimes can be, we like companies that are run by first-generation immigrants. And I never thought about myself as an immigrant, because normally, think of somebody stepping off a boat somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about talent and the companies. And Paul, I think you recently told me that you meet the founder almost every day you could invest in, and so tell me a little bit how things have changed over the past 10 years.
Yeah, it's probably also a bit of a reflection. I'm quite a dreamer and an optimist. It's probably a bit of a reflection of me as well. But no, I think, I think to a large degree it's true. I think, Gidon I mean, if I kind of, reflect on it and think how things have changed, I mean, I think Gidon mentioned it also, which is, I think the continent's evolving from somewhere with potential to where that potential gap is rapidly being kind of narrowed and things are becoming a reality. So, 10 years ago, the reality is that I think there's probably 350 million people, or the population has grown across the continent over the last decade. And 10 years ago, I think Android was only just starting. And whereas Android is now like powering 87% of the smartphones and connectivity that people have. So I think what's really changing is a few things. I think just the infrastructure to realize some of that potential from, consumer connectivity to the internet, kind of GDP growth, et cetera, I think is really like evolving quickly. I think there is a wealth of talent, and almost, I wouldn't quite call it second generation talent, but there's a lot of talent that have been involved with businesses such as, perhaps Uber or Jamir or Travelstart in many instances that are, getting a lot of practical experience and realizing that actually they can maybe go and do this for themselves. They're very talented. They've got great insights and great kind of opportunity in front of them. So we've got this combination, I think, of this like infrastructure, talent. And I think increasingly we're seeing that, 10 years ago, there was a question, can big businesses of value be built on this continent? And I think in many ways that has been answered. I still think we're very early in the phases of that, but there's been some great businesses that have been created over the last kind of 10 years and are still very, I think, early in their infancy. So I think what's changed really for me is that, talent is much more enabled and there's access. The consumers and infrastructure is there to support these businesses. And I think, capital is now realizing that actually, you can build value here. There are good examples of what's happened in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, where I think a lot of that similarity applies here. So you've just got this kind of like ecosystem, which is starting to, I think, realize that potential now. And I think that needed some fundamental things. And I think those fundamentals have really shifted over the last 10 years.
Yeah. No, so maybe Africa isn't the next big thing and is always going to be the next big thing, but it's actually going to be the next big, it is the next big thing, or maybe it is the thing, so so Lexi, I understand it wasn't easy for you, young white woman coming from the US to Africa, family, friends, even former business associates were maybe not all that supportive to your next step. How did you deal with that? Did the resistance or lack of support fuel your ambitions? I was thinking about, so Zlatan Ibrahimovic, a Swedish incredible soccer player, he was so hated in the early, part of his career, but the more they hated him, the more determined he got. So I'm sure you can't draw any parallels there, but did your the lack of support sort of fuel your ambitions? What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, first of all, I can't say I expected to be in Nigeria 10 years later, but certainly my family didn't either. My parents were worried that I would never find a husband and give them grandchildren. I did find my husband here, and we're happily married many years later. But the road wasn't easy, and actually, I would say I had the most conviction in what I was doing in my investing than anybody around my ecosystem. And certainly, I think a lot of the pushback only made me want to, challenge my conviction, but also be a stronger saleswoman for really that market opportunity. I remember, two big instances in my career when I'd started investing. The first was I'd left my private equity job to set up this venture capital firm that was backed by a family office. And I was a little bit too tough on negotiation. And he said, absolutely not, we're not doing this anymore. So I was in Nigeria without a visa, without a job, and, was scared, but really felt that this opportunity had yet to be unlocked. And I wanted to be first to really capture that opportunity. And then a second wave of kind of a terrifying experience when the investor that backed me decided that, he didn't want to continue his investments, and I put forward an offer to buy him out. But really, even though I'd built an incredible portfolio of some companies that we know now, Flutterwave, one of the first unicorns, Paystack, which was acquired by Stripe. At that time, I really couldn't find any investors to back me. So I put a lot of my own capital in, and found a few friendly faces to come behind me. But I couldn't even get my dad to back me with that buyout. But we eventually executed on it, and now those investors have seen some incredible returns. So I think it's actually starting to pay off. I still get asked a lot by my parents when I'm coming home, but this is home. Nigeria is home.
Wow. So it's interesting because an entrepreneur that I know in Lagos, he told me that if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So would you agree on that? And if so, that you're the person that personifies that.
Yeah, well, I guess one of a couple, but it's a very tough market to do business. Absolutely. A lot of things make it difficult. A government that doesn't necessarily understand technology, certainly affecting a lot of the companies today. An environment where a lot of industries have been acceptable of corruption, and technology companies are certainly not. An environment where a lot of consumers maybe are lacking trust, but are also lacking the infrastructure on terms like identity. So really unlocking such a huge market potential is harder than it looks. This potential is difficult to unlock, but certainly if you do it, you can very easily kind of take the infrastructure you've built and the learnings you've built and bring those businesses to other markets in the world. And we've already seen that with a lot of our investee companies, whether they're expanding across Africa or they're expanding across Latin America. So absolutely difficult environment, but if you can make it in Nigeria, you can make it anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I would say so. So, what preconceived ideas that you both had to throw out when it comes to investing and doing business in Africa? Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think probably the sense of a couple of things. So one is just talent. I think that, and maybe it's back to this kind of earlier point around, immigrants and people coming into the market. I think one preconception is just that there potentially isn't like local talent. I think that's probably like quite the reverse. And I think we're increasingly seeing that. So one is talent. I think the other thing is just, can you really build, big businesses and markets where, average incomes are significantly lower, and you have a lot kind of underlying, poorer spending power on average across consumers. So I think it's probably, really talent. Our market's really big enough. Can you really build big businesses with lower income consumer bases? I think that's, very much not true, but I think that's two big preconceptions. I think when you start looking at this market, that you have to really, on paper, probably get your head around. I think the reality is quite different from what it looks like from the outside.
Great. So Lexi, when you talk to possible, investors and, LPs in America and other places, what is the one thing that you sort of have to, what kind of questions are you always met with, and, what kind of story do you always have to, debunk?
Yeah, well, I would say political instability and the risk of corruption is a big one. And from what we've seen is that even though in a lot of markets where there has been political disruption, it doesn't affect the business climate, especially in these fast-growing technology companies. These entrepreneurs are able to build in spite of government, and they're diversifying their own business as well, and really putting in the mechanisms to make sure that their solutions are actually the go-to platforms when maybe the rest of industries or infrastructure doesn't necessarily work. I think to your earlier question, the couple of things that I've certainly realized, and look, I've realized them from some mistakes in investing, but I think that direct to consumer is more expensive than you would think in a market like this. And that's a lot of times because of lower digital literacy and lower trust in digital solutions. But also, digital marketing is still quite nascent. There's still a huge need for physical marketing. A lot of times your customer acquisition for consumers actually has to be done in person through an agent network, and that tends to be quite expensive. But the other side is, one thing that I hammer on is the informal marketplace, meaning a lot of these informal retailers, that's not bottom of the pyramid. These smaller businesses and SMEs have real spending, and they're smart entrepreneurs, and they're savvy, and they're growing their own businesses at multiples a year. And that's a huge market opportunity that is yet to be unlocked at scale. And it's something that we really obsess on, and how can we bring those informal retailers and SMEs kind of into the digital landscape.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. So you mentioned here in between the lines, so resilience is something that you see quite often here. And I remember a few years back when we had all this talk about day zero in South Africa or in the Western Cape, and people were freaking out, and there were some expats living here, and they said, oh my gosh, we're going to be invaded by all the people who live in the township, we're going to get murdered because they're going to take all the water. And I said, what are you talking about? They have day zero every day, they're not the problem, we are the problem, and so would you say that, and do you see this as well, Paul, that there is sort of more resilience here, or more or less the same? You're on mute.
Sorry, guys. Sorry about that. Yeah, I do think that there is these markets, like Lexi was saying about Nigeria, they're just harder markets to operate in. Life is a little bit tougher here. Things aren't as easy. And I think that just naturally builds a level of kind of like resilience. And some great attributes that kind of come with that. But yeah, I think so. My sense is, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So tell me, so you obviously meet a lot of founders, companies, and sometimes no proven business model, sometimes no revenues, or no experience in building teams or anything like that. But what is the thing that you look for in founders? I remember Lexi, you really said to me once that your first criteria is to look for an arrogant founder, and I was like, what? But what are you guys looking for? Let's start with you, Lexi.
Yeah, so I know a lot of the US VCs talk about they want to invest in people that they'd like to go and sit and have a beer with, and I don't really think about it the same way. Like some of my founders are maybe not the ones that would be my closest friends. Although we go through a lot of challenges together, so eventually we do become very, very close. But they're the founders that are, like you said, arrogant, but they believe so much in themselves and their business to really unlock the entire market and take it at scale. So they're not trying to build a lifestyle business. They're trying to build a multi-billion-dollar company that will outlive them for generations to come, right? And they won't allow anything to get in their way. I mean, I'm reminded of a founder of mine who actually, he was dealing with the telcos, and the telcos were a big part of his business. And he actually set up an office inside the office of one of the major telco companies here, without permission, really, and just to make sure that he would be there every day pushing his business through. And I think it's that obsessiveness about the business and making sure that it's the only thing in your life and number one priority. And the rest of the world, I think, talks a lot about work-life balance and mental health, but a lot of African founders don't necessarily have the liberty to be thinking as much about that, and their entire identity is wrapped up in making the success of their business work. That's the kind of founder that I look for.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I agree. Forget about work-life balance when you start a company. What is that even? Paul, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I think somewhat similar. So I think, we have to remind ourselves that, big kind of dominant companies are the exception, not the rule. Like they're scarce and they're really hard to do it. And the people that can achieve that are also scarce. And that means that they're not a standard individual. Like they've got some unique characteristics that make them different. And it just comes from that obsessive X factor that comes with just that like absolute intensity and obsession to make this work. So I think that's a must, because these things are seriously hard. It doesn't just happen. It is extremely, extremely difficult to build a business. And I guess that's probably part of the resilience component that we mentioned earlier. So I think one is that, and the other is obviously you can't do it alone. So I think finding someone that's got that talent, but is the ability to, really attract talent around them. And I think people want to be surrounded by inspiring people, and,
Obviously.
and you want to be on an exciting journey. So I think one is that obsessiveness, but two is just the ability to like surround yourself with like the best talent. I think is really a powerful combination, I guess.
Right. So Lexi, I've read somewhere that you've said that this disruption is what characterized Silicon Valley, and collaboration rather than challenging corporations and government is often a better model which works in Africa. Tell us about that. I found that very intriguing.
Yeah, completely. This is an environment where large industries like the telcos or the banks still control the large customer base, and have the brands to kind of unlock those challenges that I mentioned before, the trust that a lot of customers have with new business models coming into market. So I think a better way of route to market is really leveraging off of some of these major industries to unlock that large customer base. Because they also have the data sets that a lot of companies don't have until they've themselves reached scale. But I also think that collaborating with local governments is hugely important. And it's not something that most tech companies have done well across the world, right? And it's meant that our local governments, maybe not understanding tech, has really seen these companies as a challenge rather than a solution to unlock financial services, to unlock identity, to really bring a lot more jobs to the local ecosystem. And there's been a lot more reactive approaches. So we're really, positioning a lot of our companies that the better strategy is to engage with government, help them understand what your business is trying to do, show them the outcomes if this is successful in 5 years, what it really means to the country and the longevity of other platforms in the ecosystem. So if you want to work at scale and you want to make your life a little bit easier and less expensive, absolutely, I think collaboration is the better strategy.
Yeah, which is obviously a challenge in in an environment where there is low trust in general, and so but it's something that I find worth tackling, and something that we are spending quite some time on from my side here. And Paul, tell me a bit about obviously, most companies, they have, once they get to some size, they have a proven home market, proven product market fit. They look for money to scale geographically, and but most companies, they fail at exactly, scaling, at least from my own experience. And scaling is a completely different thing than starting a successful, company or product and make it in one market. And what's your take on scaling, and what are your criteria? How do you think about that? Or do you rather look at something and say, okay, we're investing in this company, we want to make sure that they win one market, and then maybe we can look at scaling later? What is your thought?
Yeah, so I think, maybe as a starting point, I think that the days of being able to sequentially kind of tackle markets, I think are gone. I think that's extremely difficult to do. So I think one of the biggest challenges is when to move into a new market and when not. So I don't think you could ever say you've completely won your home markets and then you're ready to move, just because I think the markets are too competitive. But I do think you at least need a pretty strong foundation in your core market, like number one. So, and that foundation for me is really that you've got not just really strong product market fit, but you've got very good business model fit, very good unit economics, and that you are very honest with yourself as a business about what those unit economics are. I think it's very easy to kind of convince yourself around vanity metrics, but I think you've got to be really like certain that you have that in place. And the reason I think you've got to be certain you have that in place is that when you're moving into a new territory, it's extremely difficult. And without one side of your business being stable, I think it is very hard. If you've got two sides of the equation which are unknown, which is one, a new market, but also your existing core is still relatively like unknown. I think the variables that opens up are many, and I think that's where kind of a lot of failure can happen. So I think one is that you've really got to have that foundation in place, and that doesn't mean to say you've got to 70% market share, whatever a kind of maturity number is you're looking at, but I think you've got to be sure that you've got an anchor there where you've got your data infrastructure, you know exactly how to look at this business properly, you're measuring things correctly, and you've got that strong unit economics. Then I think, after that, I think the big challenge is that you're moving from working in a single market where you're a machine to becoming a machine that builds machines. And I think that is a very different organizational structure, and it's a very different way of managing an organization. So I think the biggest things that we look for really that foundation is in place, but both in terms of everything from data infrastructure to sales processes to unit economics, but that the team is really thinking about how to rework that organizational structure and how to manage an organization to move into another territory. Because I think most of the failures we see are either the business is moving when it's not ready to, or it's ready to, but its infrastructure is too immature. And you can't kind of hack your way to scaling in a new market. You've got to have a foundation which is in itself scalable, and it often needs a big rework of your org structures. Yeah, no, very, very wise words there. Thanks. We've experienced that ourselves. So I've got $1 million. Where should I invest it, Lexi?
Yeah. So I love this question, but maybe I'll turn it around a little bit. I would split it between one small investment and one bigger bet. So that smaller investment, I would put behind maybe 10K or 20K, if it's my own money, by the way. I'm not talking about investors' money, but I'd put it behind some sort of accelerator that's focused on crypto companies and blockchain related products in Africa. And then the bigger ticket I would put behind a bet to build the financial rails for Pan-African commerce. And I'm not necessarily talking a Flutterwave or a Chipper Cash. I'm talking more something that actually allows a trader in Nigeria to transact with their business in Kenya seamlessly, instant, and not having any concerns over regulation. I think that's still a huge problem yet to be unlocked.
Great. Paul? Yeah, I was going to say Bitcoin. I mean, crypto. So I think that's, I think as a technology from blockchain and the impact on the continent, I think is huge. And obviously, I'm a big kind of Bitcoin fan. So I think if you were going to chuck $1 million into something, I'd still put it into Bitcoin. Yeah. Okay. So with that said, I thank you both. That was really amazing. Covered a lot of topics here. I think I learned a lot. I think also gave both me and hopefully those listening in here a lot of inspiration and hope to dare to invest and believe in Africa going forward. So thank you both for taking time out of your super busy schedules, and great to reconnect like this. Thank you so much. Thanks, Stephan. So much. Appreciate it.
Bye.